มคะในโอกาสที่เวทีทั่วโลกกำลังถามถึงสันติภาพขณะนี้ประเทศไทยมีผู้ได้รับรางวัลโนเบลสาขาสันติภาพมาเยือนประเทศไทยดรโมฮัมหมัดเอลบาราเดย์นะคะมาตามคำเชิญของมูลนิธิสันติภาพนานาชาติในการจัดงานสนทนาที่เรียกว่า Bridges เพื่อที่จะนำไปสู่การเสริมสร้างวัฒนธรรมแห่งสันติภาพในโอกาสที่ดรเอลบาราไดมาเยือนประเทศไทยก็จะได้บรรยายต่อนักศึกษาต่อคนรุ่นใหม่นะคะเกี่ยวกับสถานการณ์ความมั่นคงในระดับโลกวันนี้ดิฉันจะคุยกับดรเอลบาราไดทั้งในเรื่องของ global security และสถานการณ์ทางการเมืองในอียิปต์บทบาทของท่านด้วยนะคะ Thank you Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be on your program.
What's the main message you want to talk about global security for the Thai audience?
Well, the main message that peace doesn't come by chance. We have to work for it. It's like a relationship. It's like marriage. You have to work on it, and it doesn't come easy. There are drivers for peace, and I think the basic driver for peace is that every human being, a man or a woman, feel a sense of dignity. I think dignity to me summarizes, what we talk about, what we call democracy. Democracy, of course, all the freedoms, political freedoms, economic freedoms, but it really the dignity of and the sanctity, of course, of human life. So we need to work on that, and we are not, I think, moving very well in the right direction. There is an obscene inequality in the world, within globally and within countries. If you look at the numbers, it's terrifying, how much. I mean, when you have a number like 80 people owns as much as 3.5 billion people, that is not sustainable situation, and that's not a situation that would lead to peace, because people feel injustice, they feel humiliated, they feel angry, and a lot of what we see right now, in terms of extremism, is the result of anger.
And how do you see the world situation in terms of having more violence, especially when you compare in the last decade that you were very much in the limelight when the U.S. trying to did the Iraq war during 2003. How do you see the world has changed since that period?
I'm not sure that we have learned much, frankly. I'm not sure. I wish I could say that we are a more peaceful world right now. We are not. Yeah, we had in the last decade the Iraq war. We had, of course, Afghanistan war, which is still going on. Even Iraq, if you look at Iraq right now, I mean, it's still bombing, that society is being, divided, polarized, fragmented. Then you get now, to a larger extent, this new phenomenon of terrorism, this ISIL, when you have a group of extremists in control of an area, the equivalent, I think, of Switzerland, there is something wrong going on. So not only that there are, the wars, interstate wars, but you have now, this extremism, that are, it is not really a militia wars. It's a different kind of wars. It's asymmetric wars. And people who live within, societies and express their anger in the most heinous crimes. I mean, what we have seen lately, when you see it in Nigeria, you see it in Syria, in Iraq, in Paris, you see all this extremism. So I don't think we have made much security. And even, as I said, Iraq is not yet stabilized. Afghanistan is not stabilized. The Middle East, again, if you look, we added new, victims, if you like. Syria and Libya are in, being fragmented. So on the one hand, the world is moving toward large space. If you look at the European Union, integration. But on the other hand, you see a lot of disintegration within societies.
How do you see the role of world leaders? Because they are now having global security meeting in Munich, and they are having global terrorism summit in the U.S. in Washington.
Well, the issue, to be blunt, is put your money where your mouth is. I mean, they keep talking and having conferences about global security, about, terrorism. And it's one thing to say we're going to use force, as they are doing with ISIL, for example. it's another, which is more difficult, is to see what are the root causes of this. Why, as I always say, the same human family, we have people like Mother Teresa and a suicide bomber. It's an environment. You have to change the environment. You have to have a different environment. And I would say that, again, I go back to, understand why these people are becoming terrorists, are becoming extremists, are becoming angry. Look back again at the inequality. Look back again at, at justice. Look back to the, how to treat them as human beings. When you treat a person as human being, to my mind at least, the majority will act as human being. But if you look at their life, if you look at the poverty they live in, if you look at the oppression, there's a lot of oppressive, government around the world, then don't expect these people to, they express their anger, and their anger sometimes comes in the name of religion. They come in the name of language. They come in the name of color. But it's really, at the end of the day, it's an expression of frustration and anger.
But how do you see the situation that it seems there is no way of talking or really having dialogue? Because with the latest, what IS did with the pilot of Jordan,
we are losing in many ways. I mean, if you look at that, we are losing in many ways our sense of humanity, because you're right. I mean, what happened with this pilot, or with I think the two Japanese, journalists. I mean, it's something you cannot even imagine, the brutality, the barbarism, but at the same time, also we are losing our sense of justice. As I said, when, it is not as horrible as this, but in a way it is. When you have a lot of people dying, millions are dying every year because they don't have access to medical care. When you have 850 million people living under $2 a day, it is not that we cannot afford it. We have the money. It just we spend. I mean, when you talk about the leaders, well, I'd like to remind the leaders that we spent on development assistance and on peacekeeping together 1% of what we spent on nuclear armament. We spent $1.7 trillion on armament, and we spent 1% of that on the whole peacekeeping operations and on the whole development assistance. Well, these are, to me, that, and people should not understand me wrong. We have to obviously use, unfortunately, in the short term, force to counter ISIL, to counter any form of terrorism, to counter Boko Haram, all in Nigeria. We need to, but that's short-term solution. If we want a long-term solution, we really need to go long-term and understand the reason, the causes of why do we have that situation.
Looking back to your role during your time as Director General of IAEA, and you need to stand up against the claim by the US that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction and try to stop their waging war in Iraq. What was your conviction then that you could stand up against the claim by the US?
Well, my conviction was my conscience, my conviction that I never seen through all the reports of my colleagues who have been inspecting rigorously in Iraq, any indication that Iraq was developing nuclear weapons. Same with my colleague Hans Blix, who had seen no indication that there was chemical or biological weapons. And I understood, of course, the impact of the injustice, the unfairness of attacking a country on the basis of falsehood. But I also knew that a war was not going to be the solution, as we have seen, unfortunately, right now. I mean, there was a war. It in many ways destroyed Iraq, in many ways killed a lot of innocent civilians, but in many ways did not provide an alternative. I mean, Saddam Hussein was a horrible dictator, but this is also a question. What do you do with when you have a dictator, and you have a dictator, you still have do you go and attack every country where there is a dictator? So in many cases, or do you wait until, national evolution? In many cases, if you go through fighting, if you go through war, if you go through regime change, as they used to call it, the result is much worse than the problem you were trying to deal with. So it was It was not an easy, of course. I mean, you have to stand against the U.S., you know, with all its power, with all its media, with all its propaganda. And I have been many ways vilified, attacked, you know. But I know one thing, that you cannot compromise with your conscience. You cannot compromise with your sense of justice and fairness.
Nowadays, how do you see the world is under threat by nuclear weapon?
The world is under threat by nuclear weapons because, as I mentioned to you, we still have 16,000 nuclear weapons. We still have 2,000 nuclear weapons on alert status, which means they can, you know, be launched in a very short, maybe an hour or so. Is that a system when you go to sleep and you feel secure? Of course not. You know, do we need these weapons? Of course not. I mean, if you see all the former secretaries of defense, 4 of them, Secretary of Defense and Foreign Affairs in the Secretary of States in the U.S., all coming, you know, people like Henry Kissinger, you know, like Bill Perry, coming to say we need to move toward nuclear disarmament. These are the people who are the owners of the Cold War, if you like, and they are now coming in their mature age to realize that having nuclear weapons is much more dangerous than not having them, because they're becoming decreasingly effective, as they said, and increasingly hazardous. The possibility that we have nuclear weapon launched by accidentally or by design or through computer error is always there. And once there is a nuclear weapon launched, and there I call President Obama, I think in Prague a few years back, once you have a weapon, wherever it is, the impact on the whole survival of humanity comes into question. So I think we continue to be threatened, you know, by nuclear weapon as long as we continue to have nuclear weapons. And that is one, again, of the issues if we talk about culture of peace. We have to find a way, even if we fight, we should not use chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, because these are horrible weapons that could lead to our self-destruction.
What's the possibility of nuclear disarmament, and what the country should be prioritized in nuclear disarmament?
The countries, of course, that should be prioritized is the US and Russia. I mean, they have the one who have like 95% of nuclear weapons. And a few years back,
but no pressure for them to
that is,
disarm.
Unfortunately, Barack Obama made a commitment in Prague, I think in a few years back, committed to, you know, a world free from nuclear weapons. But we haven't seen any move in that direction, very little. 44 years ago, when we have the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, all the weapon states at that time, the 5 declared nuclear weapon states, committed themselves to a world free from nuclear weapons. But 44 years after that, you know, when you still have 16,000 nuclear weapons, you can say their commitment rings hollow, and it was not really a serious commitment. And I gave...
So it's only sweet talk that
yeah,
they want
I
to
gave
disarm
last month,
nuclear.
I think, a memorial, McNamara, you know, Robert McNamara Memorial Lecture at Harvard, and I spoke a lot on this issue, and I said, yes, exactly, it is not genuine commitment, and you need. Well, maybe they need to be pressured, but you know, again, you know, how do you? I mean, it's stating the obvious that the argument is, if you continue to rely on nuclear weapons, don't be surprised in the future if other countries will do the same. See, that's I think the threat. And if you have, instead of 9 nuclear weapon states, we have today 15 or 20, like Robert Kennedy predicted in the 60s, then the odds of a nuclear weapon being launched is much higher than what we have today. So I do not want to see ourselves sleepwalking into self-destruction, and I hope the Americans, the Russian primarily, and of course all the other nuclear weapon states, should understand that they need to leave humanity in a much better shape, in a more safer way, and as long as they continue to rely on nuclear weapons, that's not the way.
Regarding the situation in Egypt, it's been 4 years since the uprising against former President Hosni Mubarak, and then you have another coup in 2013, and you were also behind the coup to rise up against President Morsi. How do you see your own situation of the politics in Egypt?
Yeah. Well, I subscribe to what you call a revolt against President Morsi because the country was completely polarized. I never subscribed to a coup. I subscribed to a revolt, a popular revolt. But the idea was to have an early presidential election. That was, with the brotherhood, with everybody in part. So
you didn't see it as the coup?
No, when you had millions of people in the streets, the country was on the verge of civil war. We need some intervention, and I thought the intervention at that time was an early presidential election. That's what I subscribed to. But once I saw things are going in a different direction, and I saw violence, committed, people, got, this bandit demonstration by extreme violence, I realized that this is not the way for me. I mean, again, I talk that I never believed that violence is the way to settle any problem. And unfortunately, we still have, in Egypt, violence. I still hope that, there will be a social cohesion. And that's the only way, as I mentioned, people have to find a way to live together, and they have to agree, irrespective of their ideology, they have to agree on the basic values. And the basic values basically is, I should have the right to live the life I live, and the society should interfere as little as possible, unless, of course, it impacts on somebody else's freedom. But I should have my full freedom to the extent that it doesn't impact on somebody else. But these are difficult issues, and Egypt is just one example. If you look Syria, if you look Libya, if you look the whole Middle East, the Middle East is in a terrible shape, precisely because people are not yet able to find a formula, if you like, to be able to live together in peace. They are, again, including Egypt, we are paying the result of 60, 70 years of repression, of authoritarianism. And it's like a pressure cooker. And in 2011, after, when the Arab Spring came, people were revolting, and the pressure cooker, just exploded. But unfortunately, yet, there is a lot of vapor yet. We are not able to get that vapor, into energy, into positive energy. And that's, I think, is going to be a long-term process, a bit long-term process. If I look at different parts, if I look at Europe, for example, and I always ask people to look in context. Europe went like 300 years of, civil war, religious wars, but at the end of the day, realized that war is not the way. They realized that, and they went, of course, through reformation, religious reformation. Martin Luther, in the 16th century, and then went through Renaissance, Age of Reason. So there is, on the one hand, you realize after a while that violence is not the way. But on the other hand, you have to have a reformation process by which you get people to understand that there is no other way, that you cannot prevail on your own. You have to be able to live with the other, irrespective of color, race, sex, ethnicity, whatever. And that is the human journey. We're still going through that.
Are you disillusioned with people uprising with the revolution in Egypt since the day of toppling down Mubarak on the 25th of January 2011? And then later, people came out to try to get rid of President Morsi. How do you see the backlash of people rising up against the leader?
Well, it's again, as I said, this is a very nascent democracy, like in Egypt or in many other countries. It's a learning process. We are still going through the learning curve. Unfortunately, Mr. Morsi was not able to adopt an inclusive approach. He rendered society very fragmented, very polarized, and that's why he got a backlash. And the backlash was the result of the backlash. We were always, again, on 2013, on the verge of civil war again. The society was completely polarized. And what happened is what you see right now. It's not the absolute best solution at all, because we're still going through a polarized society. We still have an angry society. And However, if you look at Egypt in comparison with many other countries around in the area, Egypt is still in much better shape. But the whole Middle East is melting down. The Middle East is going through a process of finally people fighting for their own dignity. And it's going to take time. Again, one of my famous quotes, always I say, democracy is not an instant coffee. I mean, it takes time. You have to build institutions. You have to have the culture. But you have to be on the right track. And I think what I try to do right now is make sure, at least through talking, that's all, is put people on the right track to move in the right direction.
You once said that right now Egypt is in a state, it's a failed state. Do you still maintain that comment?
Well, Egypt is in a fragile state right now, and so is another, I think, 40 states are considered to be fragile, being, not yet in a stable situation. In a stable situation when you have the equity, when you have democracy, when you have the tools of governance, of good governance. There's still a lot of countries, and sure, I mean, these are situations that are the breeding grounds for extremism. So people should not just look at it and say, well, or the North could look at it and say, well, it's not our problem. Well, it is very much everybody's problem right now. And as I said, we have seen lately, no country, no part in this planet can be quarantined. You get haunted by these extremism, no matter what they are. So it's not a question just of ethics coming to people help. It's a question of survival, actually, in fact.
How do you see your role in the future of the country, future of Egypt? Do you plan to participate in the next election in 2016?
No, I'm not. I think I've done as much as I can do, in helping the youth in particular organize in 2011 and articulate a message and stage, an uprising against an authoritarian system. I think the process will go on. There will be hiccups, obviously, on the way, but it's time now for the younger generation. It's time now for a change of the generation. My role right now, as I usually say, is one of a coach and not a player. And I'd like to continue to coach the young people to make sure that at the end of the day, they'll have a future, they'll have their own dignity, and they'll have their own hope, dream. I mean, people need a dream, and you live with a dream. And I'd like to see that dream coming back to Egypt with full force, I hope, and not very far away from now.
Is that because you are disillusioned with politics? Because briefly you were vice president last year and then you resigned just after a month.
Yeah. No, that's also partly, of course, partly that. But I never really planned to stay. And I mean, I was supposed to be there as a just transition for 6 months until we get a presidential election anyway. But once, as I said, once I start see things going in the wrong direction, once I start seeing violence, once I started seeing, people being excluded, society being fragmented, I realized that that is not the environment I can work on. So it is partly that I am disillusioned, of course, by the political situation, but it's more actually is the fact that at this stage of my life, I'd rather, continue to make sure that the younger generation took over, while I'll spend my time talk about some global issues. I mean, global issues which, as we talked about, it was equity, security, which are affecting not only one country, but affecting our own planet. And I spent many years of my life doing that, most of my life, in fact, dealing with global issues. So I'm back doing what I used to do.
But how do you see the future of Egypt? Do you see as it should be pluralistic society, and what should be the role of Muslim Brotherhood or Islamists?
Well, any society to be sustainable has to be pluralistic society. I mean, you cannot have a society that exclude, and that message goes everywhere. People, rich and poor, right? Minorities, majorities, everybody has to be included. So I see no future for Egypt unless it is a pluralistic society. But like in I think what we need is some system of transitional justice. I mean, there's a lot of atrocities committed, and we need transitional justice. We need a reconciliation process, of something like what happened in South Africa, for example. You need people, a system of reconciliation, a system of judicial accountability, but after that, you have to then work on the baseline. As I said, what are the rules everybody, so-called Islamists, so-called seculars, everybody can live by, together, and then move forward. But the end result, make no mistake, is a pluralistic society. I usually give the example of Toronto, for example. Toronto have 120 nationalities living there, side by side. They realize living together that they don't bite each other, that they have the same hopes, same aspiration. And it's pretty much homogenistic societies are the worst, of course. And the more I've seen, it going around the world, that the more pluralistic the society is, the more peaceful it is. It's the worst country when you have a very homogeneous society, one race, one language. I mean, they usually don't. They are very much against accepting the other. But if you live in a society that's full of language, full of races, sort of ethnicities, you understand that this is fine, and you can live that way. And in fact, our diversity is our strength. I mean, we learn a lot from each other. If we, even within the same society, we speak different language, we eat different food, we have different culture. It's really a matter of pride and a matter of strength. But people need to experience that to realize that.
Dr. ElBaradei, thank you very much for joining.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you. Thanks.
เสียงสะท้อนจากดร. โมฮัมหมัด เอลบาราไดนะคะในโอกาสที่มากล่าวสุนทรพจน์เรื่องของการสร้างวัฒนธรรมเพื่อสันติภาพจะเห็นได้ว่ามุมมองเกี่ยวข้องกับการเสริมสร้างสันติภาพในโลกใบนี้นะคะโดยเฉพาะปัญหาที่เกิดขึ้นที่ประเทศอียิปต์ในเชิงการเมืองท่านก็มองว่าควรจะต้องมองแนวทางในการแก้ปัญหาด้วยสันติภาพเช่นเดียวกันค่ะทั้งหมดคือตอบโจทย์และที่นี่ไทย PBS สำหรับคืนนี้ค่ะดิฉันณฐา โกมลวาทินสวัสดีค่ะ